3 lives, 3 worlds, Lotus steps. Wherever step goes, Lotus blooms. Divine prayer. Lotus Step Chapter 24, Book 2. There is a dense forest to the west of Xia La Chao Tan in the kingdom of Xia, near the main mountain range of Tangqi Mountain. This forest is hidden behind the mist. It is evergreen all year round and cannot be seen by mortals. It is an eye of the thoroughfare array listed by the ancestor god when he sacrificed to chaos. It is called the Forest of the Great Abyss. There is a huge hollow tree in the forest. Its trunk is as big as a small room. There is a large ice couch in the middle. On the ice couch, one person is lying on his back and the other is sitting on his back. The man lying on his back is dressed in golden armor, with his head covered by a golden mask as if he is sleeping, but also as if he is dead. The man sitting on his back is dressed in white, his eyes are closed, his face is extremely handsome. His hands are in the meditation seal, and his bearing is as high as the mountains. In such a scene, His Highness the Third Highness is using the forbidden technique hidden away on the Master Abuto. The National Master Suji was protecting the law outside the ice couch. More than a month ago, the Lord of the Underworld, Xia Guju, read through the vast 210,000-year-old documents of the underworld, and finally found out the soul-tracing book of the Master Abu Tua, that is, Emperor Jiaoxi, and personally came to the mortal world and handed it over to Lian III. A thick soul-tracing book records the tens of thousands of reincarnations of a person after entering the mortal world. The last page records his name in this life. Unexpectedly, the Master was an acquaintance in this life. The last page of the soul-tracing book can contain 8 words, Shiguo Lichuan. Ji's family Mingfeng. According to the records in the soul-tracing book, Ji Mingfeng is the 7,724th reincarnation of the Master Abuto in the mortal world. Faced with such a result, the Imperial Master was very surprised, and His Highness also pondered for a moment, but did not say anything. At that time, the news that Beiwei declared war on Dashi and occupied the counties in Huku reached Lian San's military tent. As the commander-in-chief, he was unable to escape for a while. The imperial preceptor felt that during the war, he could not do anything other than raise the altar, burn talisman paper, and pray for blessings from the Heavenly Lord in the 9 heavens and his family. However, this war will be decided by the Heavenly Lord. The younger son personally took command and supervised the battle. What kind of altar could he ascend to, perform any rituals, and burn any talismans? He just wanted to do something else to worry about Lian Sanson. Lian San was surprised when he heard that the Imperial Master was determined to take all the responsibility for restoring Ji Mingfeng's memory on himself. Although the Imperial Master was doing his job well before him, he was basically forced to do so. Taking the initiative to take on a dangerous and complicated job like today was never the style of a national advisor. After sending the soul-tracing book, Xia Gujua, who had not left the military tent for a while, heard what the Imperial Master wanted and looked at him with admiration. He coughed and pointed to him. In this case, you can first go to Nanren Ancient Tomb in Zitan Mountain. That is the tomb of the human master, and his immortal body is stored there. You enter the tomb to find the human master's immortal body and take him to a place rich in spiritual energy for temporary storage. He paused. You need to pay attention. That ancient tomb is the immortal body of the Guardian Lord. There are many mechanisms in the tomb, so you have to be more careful. Then he said slowly, then you need to come to our Ming division to get the water of each one, even if Tubo and the underworld beast don't need you to go. You must tame them, but you still need to subdue the 2 beasts that guard the water of each one, the scorpion dog and the scorpion beast. They are the beasts that I tamed from Beihao Mountain when I was young. They are somewhat ferocious, so you need to be careful. The Imperial Master was confused because he didn't expect this matter to be so complicated. He looked at Lian San and said, "This matter, couldn't it be that I tied up Prince Ji here, and then Lord Hades gave me some each one water, and then I just feed it to Prince Ji? Will it be done?" His Highness the Third nodded. "The steps are like this." Lord Gujua suddenly understood why the Imperial Master was so brave today. He withdrew his admiration for him and couldn't help but teach him some basic common sense of being a god. Ji Mingfeng is now a mortal body. How can he bear the return of his memories for nearly 10 eternity? If you pour that much water from the river of memory into a mortal body, there is no way of knowing that he will be unable to withstand the explosion and die. Since you want to search for his first life memory, this cannot be done without an immortal body. The Imperial Master regretted it endlessly and secretly resented, but His Highness the Third Highness clearly said at the beginning. His Highness the Third smiled and played with a military order in his hand. What did I say at the beginning? Did I tell you different steps to do things? The Imperial Master suddenly remembered what His Highness the Third Highness said back then. His Highness the Third Prince said that this matter is actually very simple. Find the owner through the soul tracing book, fill him with several bowls of each one water, and you will know where the red lotus seeds have gone. Yes, the steps are indeed just like this. The Imperial Master wanted to die, so he discussed with Xie Gulu in a remedial manner. The poor road to the tomb of the Lord may be possible, but the water of each one. Since the Lord of the Underworld has lent us the soul-tracing book of the Lord, why not as a favor, will you give us a few bottles of each one water? Mr. Gujue was not merciful at all. Nothing can be done without rules. The Underworld has its own rules, but I cannot be merciful in this matter. The Imperial Master looked at Lian San for help. His Highness the Third Highness smiled at him encouragingly. I believe you. Just go ahead. The national teacher's heart was filled with despair. Lord Guzhen suddenly remembered something and spoke to Lian San. Speaking of which, if the soul of the Lord returns to the immortal body he left behind, it will be like letting him completely wake up from the endless reincarnation. He frowned at Lian San. Although the historical records left by the gods do not record why the human master abandoned his immortal body and entered reincarnation after the mortals settled in the mortal world. But now the mortal world is no longer the original mortal world, and the mortals have many kings. He is no longer the king of the human race. If he wakes up, what obstacles will he have in the mortal world? His Highness the Third Highness did not think it was a problem and said with a normal expression, it doesn't matter, he will wake up sooner or later, and it is not too early for him to wake up at this time. Xie Guzhen was quiet for a moment. It's good that Third Young Master is aware of what's going in the next month. The Imperial Master went through untold hardships to retrieve the immortal body of the human master, obtain the water of each one, and kidnapped Ji Mingfeng himself from Pinyin City after being drugged unconscious, and explored his infinite potential. Considering that Prince Ji would have questions when he was awake, the Imperial Master was worried day and night, and finally he chose to let Prince Ji remain unconscious until he could wake up. An immortal corpse, a Taoist priest, and a sleeping man stayed in a tree hole in the Great Abyss Forest for 15 days, waiting for His Highness the Third Prince to finish his world-ending event and come to change his body and condense his soul for his master. Lian San returned to the Great Abyss Forest the day after he sued for peace in Beiwei. He spent 7 nights peeling off Ji Mingfeng's soul from his mortal body and put it into the golden-armored immortal body. He also used the golden elixir to urge the soul and immortal body together. Connected, successful. The next night, the National Master brought water from each one, took off the golden mask, and intended to pour it into the mouth of the Master. After years of vicissitudes, I don't know how many thousands of years have passed. In fact, even a skeleton National Master behind the golden mask would not be too surprised. But when the mask is lifted, the face is young and fresh, like a face carved from jade, looks just like Ji Mingfeng, as if he has never passed away, just fell asleep. The Imperial Master was greatly shocked, but His Highness the Third Highness did not take it seriously. He took the each one water from the Imperial Master's hand and poured it into the Master's mouth on his behalf. After 3 pots of each one water were poured down, His Highness decided to take a look at the Master's memory before he woke up. Therefore, in the tree hole in the Great Abyss Forest, there is a scene where the warrior in golden armor and the young man in white lie down and sit together, one frowning and concentrating on casting spells, while the other is ignorant and accepts it peacefully. At 9 o'clock, the young man in white who was sitting with his eyes closed opened his eyes again. The imperial master hurriedly stepped forward. "Your Highness, what did you see?" Lian San frowned slightly. He found out. He glanced at the young man who seemed to be sleeping on the ice couch, rubbed his forehead. He should be waking up soon. He stood up and left the ice couch, standing on the side of the jade table. He held a pot and poured himself a glass of water, but he only held the water glass and didn't drink it for a long time. The imperial master hesitantly called him from behind, "Your Highness." He also seemed not to have heard it, but he remembered what he had just seen in Ji Mingfeng, no, Emperor Jiaoxi, and what he saw in Emperor Jiaoxi's heart. Probably because the water of each one awakened the master's sleeping memory, but the master himself was not awake for the time being. He sneaked into his sea of consciousness. There was no need for the Third Highness to manipulate Zongmu to break through his mind, and the long-lasting memories were like a wave. Attacked. It was dusk, and the gloomy sky was like an iron pot, covering the wilderness below. A tribe in the wilderness had just experienced a brutal massacre, with blood, corpses, and wildfire everywhere. A tiny human child crawled out of the main tent that was half burned by wildfire. The child was about 3 or 4 years old, with a dirty face and holding a small machete. As soon as he got out of the tent, he found a Mingji beast not far away munching on a fresh corpse. The child froze immediately. The sensitive beast also noticed him and suddenly raised its head, looking at each other through the wildfire and gunpowder smoke. The little child pursed his lips nervously and slowly raised the scimitar in his hand. The beast seemed to be enraged and lunged at him with a roar. Seeing that the child was about to die at the mouth of the Mengji beast, a light suddenly appeared in midair, and the beast that crashed into the light turned into ashes and flew away in an instant. A pair of young men stepped out of the light. Both were elegant and good-looking. The young man in white raised his eyes and looked around, sighing. Another human tribe has been dragged down. The young man in green curled his lips. The human race is weak and has always been dependent on the gods. Now the 4 races of gods, demons and ghosts are fighting endlessly. How can the small human race be alone? It is inevitable that they will be affected. But if this continues, they are really not far away from annihilation. The young man in white looked at the child who was looking at them warily not far away. "Your Majesty said that as long as this child is saved, the human race will not be exterminated." The young man in green also cast his gaze on the child, stroking his chin with his hand and wondering, "Is it really him?" "Your Majesty, your calculations are not wrong, right? By the way, why haven't you come yet?" The young man in white lowered his eyes. Father God came to Gai Mountain again to invite her to Shueishang Academy. Maybe he was delayed by Father God. The young man in green clothes looked up at the sky. How come Father God hasn't given up yet? She has been rejected more than 10 times. "Your Majesty, she doesn't like going to school. Even if she tries to persuade her 100 times, she won't go." Then he sighed. "Actually, I think it would be better for her to go to school to divert her attention. After all, it is not a good idea to spend all your energy on collecting exotic flowers and herbs from all over the world. The more you work, the more obsessed you are. The thing is, if you pamper those flowers and trees too much, it's easy for them to ride on top of her head." The young man in white scolded. "What nonsense are you talking about all day long?" The young man in green clothes touched his nose. "I'm not talking nonsense. Could it be that you have forgotten the reason why your Majesty covered his face with jade and no one in the world recognized his face? It was because she wanted to remove Liang Rong from her tomb. Shan's hometown moved to Argugu Mountain, but Bogrong was jealous of her beauty and hated her for being prettier than she was. She had to swear that she would never show her true face to anyone in this life before she would move to Gugu, and she actually agreed." The young man in white coughed. "Don't say that about Bei Rong. She is just a bit more petite. Besides, your Majesty still loves her the most. If you say this about her, if she finds out, I'm afraid it will bring trouble to the whole girl. If you turn it over, your Majesty will not be happy if you hear it." The young man in green kicked the pebbles under his feet and said gloomily, "So I said that if you respect her, it is better to listen to Father God and go to school." She is in Gugu, and the mountains of unruly flowers and plants are relying on her love to dominate me. Make a blessing. Suddenly a wind blew up, and the boy in green clothes immediately shut up, and the girl's clear voice sounded, fierce and delicate at the same time. Xiao Shuanghe, what bad things are you saying about me again? As the voice fell, the beauty in black clothes fell to the ground. The girl showed her true form in midair. The young man in green took a step back and said harshly, Shui and I were just chatting for a few words. Which of your ears heard me saying bad things about you? The boy in white, known as Shui, glanced helplessly at the two bickering men, then turned to the child a few feet away. At some point, a man in yellow stood in front of the children. The man's back was to them. The man's yellow robe was wide and had long sleeves, covering his slender body. His hair was like crow feathers, not tied up or tied up, so he could only see his back. There is quite a bit of indistinguishability between male and female. Shui took a few steps forward and called out, Your Majesty. Shuanghe, a young man in green clothes, and Zongrong, a young girl in black clothes, who finally stopped bickering, also came forward. The man naturally heard it, but he just raised his right hand slightly and pressed it down, in order to make them all retreat. A few fingertips were exposed from Liu Yun's broad sleeves, which were as white as ice and snow and as delicate as they were delicate. Never the hands of a grown man. The man squatted down in front of the child, seemed to be sizing him up, and then said, Little boy. It was a girl's voice. The sound was like spring water flowing into a thick fog in the spring mountains. It was very soft and pleasant, but it was also a bit misty and unreal. The child looked at her blankly, as if he didn't understand that the little boy she meant was him. But she seemed to like this title very much, and called him again, Little boy. She reached out and touched the child's head. Are you willing to come with me? Perhaps his throat was injured by the fireworks. When the little child spoke, his childlike voice was a little hoarse. I don't. He hugged the small scimitar in his hand and took a step back. I want to find me. Dad and Mom. I want to be with my dad and mom. That's easy to do, she replied. Your tribe is dead, and your father and mother are gone too. We can take your father and mother's ashes with us. The child understood her words, and then he realized that the tribe was dead and his parents were dead. He suddenly opened his eyes wide and felt a little overwhelmed. When his eyes turned red, big tears rolled down his dirty cheeks. He sobbed, but immediately held it back, looking at the god in front of him with hesitation, but tears kept rolling down. She seemed a little surprised. Why are you crying like this? Although the child was young, he already understood what had happened and was so sad that he could not speak. She turned around and looked at the boys and girls standing in a line behind her. To say "see" is not accurate, because her face was covered with an extremely exquisite sapphire mask. The mask blocked her face, and others could not clearly see where she was looking. They could only see her facing the three attendants, still curious and puzzled. I also know that people have 7 emotions, but I have never known the feeling of admiration. So much so. He seemed to feel that the child was crying pitifully. Is there any way you can make the little boy no longer sad? Zongrong, who was closest to her, had an angry look on her face, and her expression showed grievance. My dear, when did you ever call me my dear? She stamped her feet and turned around and ran away. Shuanghe looked at Bo Rong's back and was shocked for a moment. She is actually jealous of a child. Turning around, the master asked them to coax the child, and Bo Rong ran away, leaving only him, and Shuanghe realized that the chance of him being named was too high, so he quickly said, Your Majesty, I don't know how to coax children. I am a lotus flower, and I don't understand the 7 emotions of the human race. He tentatively made a suggestion. Maybe if we let him cry for a while, he will be fine? The girl in yellow turned to the child and said back to him, If you don't want to coax Xiaoguai, then go and coax Arong. You have to coax one of the two. As soon as she finished speaking, Xiang Shuanghe ran to the child desperately, hugged him and started playing with him. The child just wanted to be alone and sad, and was tossed up and down in midair by the young man. He didn't find it interesting at all. He stretched out his hand just to scratch the young man's face, but his little arms and legs couldn't reach it, and he was so angry that he shed tears. Shui watched with the girl on the side, but neither of them made a move to stop it. After a long while, Shui said softly, "When your majesty first met Yinlin, me, and Shuanghe, you gave us names. This child will be your fourth divine envoy. It stands to reason that he should also be given a name by you today. Your majesty, have you decided what to name him?" The girl lowered her head slightly, and a strand of black hair fell down to her neck. The long neck was set off by the crowfeather-like black hair, which was almost transparent. She thought about it and then whispered, "He is the hope of the human race. He has been the light for many years." Jiaoxi means light. From now on, let's call him Jiaoxi, Emperor Jiaoxi. The child was being thrown into the air by Shuanghe. As if he heard her voice, he turned his head to look at her with great effort. This memory also disappeared at this time. The vast wilderness, the human tribes on the wilderness that were about to be burned out by wildfire, and the gods who were completely invisible in the bleak smoke and dust were all like shadows cast in the water. When the water rippled, the shadows dispersed. His Highness the Third Highness knew that what he saw was the scene when Emperor Jiaoxi first met the god Zhu Ti. Since the girl in yellow shirt was called by Shuanghe and Shui as their lord, she must be Zhu Ti. In fact, it is strange to say that almost all the gods who emerged in the great prehistoric and ancient times can be found in the library of Emperor Donghua. However, only this god Zhu Ti can't be found even if he browses through the history books. Found a clear portrait of her. The only picture of a back is from 20,000 years ago. At that time, Zhongxin was reorganizing the history books. Because the sacrifice of god Zhu Ti to chaos so that humans could live in peace in the mortal world was really a big event, the Heavenly King ordered the historians to draw the scene as a picture scroll and record it in the history books. The immortal officials who compiled history followed the records in the past immortal treasure books and exhausted their imagination to draw the scene at that time. However, they did not dare to offend the goddess Zhu Ti, so they all knelt down in front of Emperor Donghua's Taichan Palace and asked him to speak with him. The emperor of the same generation as the god Zhu Ti painted a picture of Zhu Ti's appearance. Unexpectedly, the emperor actually said that he had never seen Zhu Ti's true face, so he let them draw whatever they wanted. Of course, the historians did not dare to draw casually. It is said that they used the mother of the Third Highness as a reference to figure out the back of the ancestor. After paying homage, it was included in the annals of history. Seeing it now, the back figure that the historians painstakingly painted was completely different from the original figure. In fact, according to what His Highness the Third Highness thought, he also believed that the historians were right. The god of light and the god of truth, who was born 300,000 years ago, should be as majestic, solemn, and beautiful as his mother. Somewhat old. He really didn't expect her to be a girl. Although we can't see her face, looking at her body and listening to her voice, if we consider her age as a mortal, she is only 28 years old. This somewhat surprised him. However, before he could think too much, in Emperor Jiaoxi's Sea of Consciousness, where the previous memory disappeared, the second memory had already followed, slowly unfolding in front of His Highness the Third Prince. It is a very high and wide cave with a mysterious crystal as the roof and white jade as the beams. The bright pearls are scattered on the beams like stars, shining brightly. Di Jiaoxi, who has grown into a half-grown boy, is holding a sky-blue beauty goblet in his hand, walking slowly in the jade corridor. The further in, the darker the pearl becomes. In front of a pair of crystal curtains, the young man stopped and said in a low voice, "Jin Rongjuan, I got the water from the tomb you asked for." After saying this, he waited for a while, but no one responded. The young man lowered his eyes and said again, "Then I will put it in the palace." He stretched out his hand to lift the crystal curtain, stepped into the palace door with his head lowered, and placed the jade vase on a coral table in the palace. He raised his head, as if he wanted to say something more, but when he raised his head, he was completely stunned. A few steps away, a sharp gauze separated a clean room. In the bathhouse made of clams, a beautiful woman is bathing in the pool. The gauze is light and thin, and the beauty is sitting against the wall of the pool. Her white arms are exposed outside the edge of the pool, lazily supporting her forehead, as if she is taking a nap. Even when she was bathing, the mask remained on her face, so it was not difficult to guess who she was. However, even if she wears a mask, her beauty in the bath is not compromised. Gaowan's jet black hair, a mask as thin as cicada wings, and a strange mask carved with complicated patterns. Under the soft light of clams and pearls, her neck, collarbone, and arms, which are as white as snow, pass through the bright red shark gauze. A kind of hazy and almost confused monster. The young boy Zhaoxi took a few steps forward like a man possessed, but his steps were very messy. The girl who was taking a nap after Samesha finally woke up. Zhaoxi. There was neither embarrassment nor panic in her voice, just a little surprise. Do you have a problem with me? She still maintained the same posture and sat leaning against the pool wall, turning her head slightly. You go out and wait for me for a while. That gentle voice seemed to immediately lift the spell on the young man's head, and he suddenly woke up, but this wakefulness left him panicked and at a loss. The young man turned around quickly, and when she called him Zhaoxi again in confusion, his cheeks turned crimson, and before he had time to answer her, he ran away. The young man who escaped from the dormitory was just walking with his head down, but unexpectedly bumped into Boy Rong, who was heading into the cave. Bo Rong steadied his body and said politely, "Are there any monsters chasing you behind you? Are you walking in such a hurry?" Then she looked at his hand and said, "Where's the water from Jizhong that I asked you to fetch for me?" He scolded, "Don't think that I'm ordering you, I'm training you. You're a human being, and your qualifications are not good. You don't have much experience. How can you be embarrassed to be the envoy of your majesty? You can have some snacks." The young man frowned and interrupted her, "I have already put the water from the tomb into your bedroom." Zongrong was stunned for a moment and murmured, "Your Majesty's bath has recently been filled with snakes and flowers. She should be taking a bath in my palace right now." She suddenly reached out and held his chin, forcing him to look upright. Looking at her, those pretty almond eyes suddenly burst into flames, and he said solemnly, "Did you see it?" The young man knocked her hand down with his backhand and stared at her with neither humility nor arrogance. If that handsome face was not flushed, he would probably be more imposing. He counterattacked, "Your Majesty is not your property." Zheng Rong looked at him for a while and sneered, "You like her too." The blush on the young man's face became even worse, but he said coldly, "It has nothing to do with you." Zheng Rong was completely irritated by him and gritted her teeth and said, "I advise you to accept this idea. This is for your own good." She came from the light and was destined to live a life of ruthlessness and desirelessness. You can still turn around before you get stuck in the mud. The young man also became angry. "Why don't you say this to yourself?" This short sentence seemed to touch the painful ribs of Bai Rong. Her face seemed to be smiling and crying, and her slender fingers pointed directly at the bridge of his nose. "You," she said bitterly, "you don't know what to do." She stamped her feet and ran away. The young man frowned and looked at her back. At some point, Shui stood beside him. The boy in white clothes in the past now looks like a stable young man, and his speech is still elegant and warm. Shui sighed and said to him, "Don't look at Zongrong, who is usually cute and willful. She has watched you grow up. She always treats you well in her heart, and this time, she really does it for your own good." The young man seemed to have never thought that what he had buried deeply in his heart would be suddenly revealed by two people. He hung his head in embarrassment. Shui paused for a while and asked him, "Did you know that the god of light initially had no gender?" The boy raised his head in shock. Shui continued, "The god of light is 40,000 years old, and he can choose his gender only when he reaches adulthood. When Jinrong met the Lord had no gender. Zhangrong is beautiful and rare to see in heaven and earth. The Lord wants to she moved from Jizhong Mountain to Guyu Mountain. Bai Rong put forward many conditions, and your majesty agreed to them all, including the one that Shuanghe said before, that she should not show her true face to others in her life." He sighed. Later I learned that this is the clan rule of their Boy Rong clan. After a husband meets his wife, he can only let his wife see his true face throughout his life. So Boy Rong treats the Lord as her husband. When he first met her, so he wanted to wait for her to turn into a man when she became an adult, so that she could marry him. He looked at the young man. Zhenrong fell in love with you before you changed your gender. She never thought that you would choose as a woman. Even if your majesty becomes a woman, she can no longer escape. She has already been trapped in the mud, so the words you just scolded her for admonishing you should be left to herself, which hurt her very much. The young man was a little at a loss. He lowered his head slightly. I didn't mean it, it's just. He was probably not born with the temperament to bow his head in front of others. After all, he didn't finish the sentence and instead asked Shui hesitantly. He thought, at that time, Your Majesty, why did you choose to be a woman? She has neither the 7 emotions nor the 6 desires. It doesn't matter to her whether she wants to be a man or a woman. After all, she didn't care. She pursed her lips and spoke in a very loud voice, low, as if she was telling herself, she loves Bei Rong so much, so what's wrong with becoming a man for her? Shui Yi was silent for a moment. You are right. She was born with no desires, and her heart was not in the world of mortals. Therefore, it made no difference to her whether she became a man or a woman. But, he said slowly, when she becomes an adult, one night in the year before, she had a dream. Without keeping the boy waiting, he said, it was a prophetic dream. She saw in the dream that hundreds of thousands of years later, she would marry a male god, gave birth to an heir for that male god. So when she came of age, she followed destiny and chose to become a goddess. The young man seemed to be confused. His face was blank, and the blood gradually faded from his face. He murmured, Who is that male god? Shui shook her head. She didn't tell me. I only know that the god will not be born until tens of thousands of years later. The young man held on to the wall of the cave beside him, feeling pain but not pain, mocking but not mocking. I only know that destiny only cares about big things. How ridiculous. Does destiny still care about the marriages of gods? Shui Yi sighed. Destiny does not care about marriage, and the precognitive dream of Your Majesty never predicts trivial matters. I guess, because destiny requires her to be the god of light and combine with that male god to give birth to an important descendant who maintains the cycle of heaven, so I gave her a prophecy at that time, letting her become a goddess to wait for her destined husband. As Shui Yi's words fell, the brightly lit cave went away, and the young man in white clothes and the young man in black clothes also went away, and the second memory ended here. The Third Highness did not enter Emperor Zhaoxi's Sea of Consciousness to inquire into his privacy. Seeing this, he was actually a little bored. Probably because the water of each one is slowly taking effect. Those memory fragments are like the reflection of the setting sun on the sea, floating on the sea of consciousness, rising into the air in an instant, turning into frozen phosphorus fire. His Royal Highness tried to thaw one of the flames. In the third memory, Di Zhaoxi already looked like a young man, no different from the current Ji Mingfeng. It can be seen that many years have passed, but Zhu Tiai's stature and appearance are still the same as before. It was dusk, and the two of them stood in front of a mountain waterfall. They seemed to have been talking for a long time, but this memory started from the middle of the conversation. Amidst the gurgling of the mountain waterfall, I don't know what Zhu Ti said. The young Zhaoxi's face was forbearing, and the fingers hanging by his side were clenched into fists. At least his voice was still calm. You want to understand the 7 emotions and 6 desires of the human race, because you is that the god you once dreamed of? Shui said that the reason why you chose to become a woman was because you had a precognitive dream about him. The handsome young man finally couldn't hold it back. He took a step forward and gritted his teeth and asked, What exactly did you see in that dream that made you want to give up this godhead who was born with no desires, and instead try your best to pursue a personality? The god of light, who always looked aloof from the world, seemed to be stunned. Shui Yi talks too much. But it didn't look like she was angry. She seemed to think about it. I don't want to give up my godhood. I just want to cultivate another personality. She said unhurriedly, when the human race settles down and I have completed my mission, God really has no control over how I will practice in the future. Xiaoan and Xie Ming are both reliable, and everything will be fine. The arrangements have been made for you to take care of me. I just hope that this matter will be foolproof. But, Jiaxi. She turned to face the young man. I told you this, but you reacted like this, because you want me to regret telling you. This is about it, right? There was no question in the spring-like voice, but it made the young man turn pale. After a long while, the young man said bitterly, My beloved has always known that, and he specifically told me that you will practice the 7 emotions for others, just to make me give up. Mr. Zongrong and we are by your side. For thousands of years, you have never treated us. He suddenly became angry. How virtuous and capable is that man? He has not even been born yet. Due to destiny, it is not enough for you to transform into a female body for him. Do you have to be dyed for him? Has the Master's 7 desires completely tainted this innocent soul of the God of Light? She faced the distance and didn't speak for a while. After a long time, she suddenly said, You just asked me what I saw in that prophetic dream, right? She paused. I saw towering palaces and long streets. Prosperous, I also saw the desert and the Gobi, the faraway land, but he traveled all over the mountains and rivers for me, tossing and turning, feeling depressed and worried. Then finally one night, he found me and told me that he liked me. Here, she raised her hand, still wearing a wide robe with long sleeves, and the sleeves with free-flowing moire patterns on her fingertips were exposed a little, and lightly touched her chest. When he said those words, he jumped heavily. 5 flavors suddenly emerged. The taste is indescribable, but it made me cry. I don't know what it means, but what it means, I really want to find out, otherwise I won't be able to sleep well night after night. Her voice had always been a bit ethereal, and now it was even more like a dream, but to the young man it seemed terrifyingly real, like a thorny thorn that stung him. He murmured, but she pressed her hand down, suppressing the words he wanted to say, and continued, The so-called desire for nothing means non-attachment. 40,000 years before that night, I was indeed called nothing. I have no desires, I don't value everything, I am not persistent, but at that moment I became persistent. Although it was destiny day after day until today, in my heart, I am looking forward to tens of thousands of when I met him again years later. I was looking forward to finding out what the heartbeat that night meant and what the tears I shed meant. The so-called innocent soul of the God of Light has been stained with dust since that moment. Why is it not died for you or for Zongrong, but for a person in a dream? You ask me this question, but I don't have an answer. Do you understand? The young man turned pale and closed his eyes hard. After a long time, he said sadly, I have nothing to say. But at this moment, the mountain waterfall in front of the 2 people suddenly turned into a huge wave, and in an instant, the 2 people had disappeared in the wave. Above Di Zhaoxi's sea of consciousness, a high wall of mysterious crystals suddenly rose from the ground, blocking the phosphorus fire of memory within the high wall. Thousands of bows and arrows were instantly set up on the high wall. His Highness reacted very quickly. He ducked out of the Master's consciousness before the arrows came, leaving only a mighty arrow behind him, destroying the Master's consciousness. The sea was stirred until the water became dark and the sky became dark. On the ice bed, Zhaoxi woke up when the first drop of each one water entered her throat, but all her energy was used to take care of those memories that were moistened by each one water and revived like bamboo shoots. The child was born, so even though he noticed that Lian San had sneaked into his consciousness, he was unable to build a wall in his heart to block him from the sea of consciousness. Seeing that more secrets were about to be exposed to others, he finally gathered enough energy to regain the autonomy of his consciousness. At that moment, he entered the tens of thousands of years of memories before reincarnation, the memories of the 180,000 years since reincarnation and this. As Ji Mingfeng's memory in this life, all the old time that broke out of the ground and became phosphorus fire suddenly turned into a huge light, returned and condensed into the body covered by the golden armor. Zhao Shi remembered everything. In his memory, which Lian Song had never seen before, he had seen Zhu Tiai's true face. The rare beauty in the world shocked him and made him fall deeper into this fruitless love. Later, in the days approaching the opening of the Ruomi Gate, he once again heard Sudi mention the god who had moved her heart. She said that he would be the water god of the new god era. But Shawan's nirvana, if the wooden door opens, the human race moves to live, the ancestors offer sacrifices, Mo Yuan is conferred as a god on the top of the 9 heavens, and the new age of gods begins. He has waited for 30,000 years. With ridicule and unwillingness, wanting to see what she has been waiting for, the water god will be so extraordinary, but the position of water god has been vacant for 30,000 years. Later, he got tired of being in this world without her, and even began to doubt whether she would really come back to life. He could not bear the loneliness and waiting, so he left the immortal body in the house he built for her. In the tomb, he turned around and went to the underworld and entered reincarnation. After that, it was a confusing and endless cycle of reincarnation. The water god who had been waiting for Bohuang for tens of thousands of years was finally born during this period. And during his countless journeys as a mortal being, he had a chance encounter with the fashionable and young water god. At that time, he was unaware that he had forgotten his unwillingness to compete with the young man. That small memory was only a small fragment, scattered in his thousands of reincarnation journeys. If it weren't for the water of each one, I'm afraid it would be difficult to regain it in this life. Now everything is clear. Chengyu is Zhu Ti, and the water god is Lin Song. In fact, he and his majesty are destined to be destined after all, he thought. Otherwise, how could they meet and get to know each other among the millions of mortals in this vast reincarnation? 7,724 reincarnations. He had been wandering in chaos for such a long time in this reincarnation, and now he finally waited for her resurrection. However, since he was destined to be with her first, why did God allow the water god to come to the world at this time? Recalling the past, he determined that Lian San absolutely didn't know Chengyu's identity. So what does the water god want to know when he awakens him from reincarnation and enters his sea of consciousness to explore his past memories while he is unable to resist? He slowly opened his eyes. Water god. Perhaps because he had not used this body for tens of thousands of years, his voice seemed to be rusty and his voice was a little hoarse. He moved his joints, and the Imperial Master tried to help him, but he raised his hand to block him and sat up on his own. I really didn't expect that. He looked at the man sitting at a jade table a few steps away. The young man in white said, "After the new god era, the water god that the world has been waiting for tens of thousands of years is actually you." When he was Ji Mingfeng, he disliked him very much. Now that the memories of the past have returned, his love rivals are even more jealous when they see each other. He said coldly, "If the wooden door was opened that day and the human race migrated to the mortal world, the ancestors of God and your Mo Yuan god once re-established the order of heaven and earth, and strictly ordered the gods of the 8 desolations not to enter the mortal world and interact with human races without their destiny. But now the water god is acting so wantonly in the mortal world. I wonder what kind of destiny he is following." He made a preemptive strike, not only talking about Lian Song entering the mortal world and interacting with mortals, but also the matter of Lian Song awakening him. He defined them all as wanton acts, because he knew that Lian Song must have some agenda when he awakened him. And he wanted the water god to understand that even if he tried his best to restore his integrity, he would not accept his love. Not only that, he could also ask him for his guilt. Therefore, if he is smart enough, don't try to threaten him with this favor and exchange anything from him. There was confusion in the eyes of the young water god, and he obviously understood the meaning of his words, but said calmly, "The human master has not supervised the affairs of the human race for tens of thousands of years. That is, he will no longer be the king of the human race. In this case, it would be better for your majesty not to interfere with the affairs of heaven and earth, the mortal world, or even my own affairs." Zhao Shi frowned. When he was Ji Mingfeng, he had experienced Lian San's temper to some extent. He was proud of himself and difficult to deal with. But this time, this was the third time in a row that I wanted to ask for something from him. According to common sense, not bowing to him, but being polite to him is the way to go. Your Excellency is a little arrogant. He scolded. The corners of the young man's lips curled up into a smile, as if he didn't care. Your Majesty has a bad voice, so you don't have to go around in circles with me. He casually held the saucer on the table, and there was no sign of respecting the elderly or caring for the young. I mean, his temperament is calm and cold, but he has concealed his sharp edge, and he seems to be reasonable. I don't wake up the Venerable to help you, so you don't have to worry too much, and I don't think you owe me anything. Why do you love me? I woke you up, the saucer clicked, to make a deal with you. Zhao Shi suddenly had a bad premonition. He tried to use his luck, and sure enough, he felt that his spiritual veins were blocked and his body was stagnant. Only then did he realize that the man in front of him had sealed his magic power when he was condensing his soul and changing his body. It is an unimaginable thing to have the soul of the human master and the immortal body, but not the slightest magic power to protect them. Lian San can indeed make a deal with him. He has plenty of chips. Having been the revered divine envoy of Gugu Mountain for tens of thousands of years, no one dared to touch him, not to mention the human race, even the 4 races of gods, demons, and ghosts. Today, Lian San actually suffered such a fate. Zhao Shi's first reaction was to be stunned. He exerted his strength again, but his body still didn't respond. His shoulders suddenly slumped. He felt extremely embarrassed. No matter how well educated he was, he couldn't help but be indignant. Do the gods of the new god era know that the water god they've been waiting for many years is like this? A despicable person who takes advantage of others. Being denounced as despicable by him, the young man was not happy or angry. Everyone knows that I am not easy to deal with. He raised his eyelids slightly. The good news is that there is something that the Venerable must know. You also want to know that as long as your Majesty informs me of this matter, you will no longer have to deal with me from now on. This is not a gratifying thing. Zhao Shi suppressed the anger in her heart. You just used Zongwu to explore my memory. He understood, frowned, and asked, What exactly do you want to know? The young man's fingers were still clasped around the saucer, the whereabouts of God Zhu Ti. After hearing the 6 words, Zhao Shi's mind suddenly buzzed. This person actually discovered the resurrection of your Majesty. He really didn't know Cheng Yu's identity, but why was he looking for your Majesty? Did he already know about your Majesty and him? That fateful relationship? After a long time, Zhao Shi spoke with a cold voice. You and her, you know. He stopped abruptly. What is the purpose of you trying so hard to find the whereabouts of your Majesty? The young man looked at him for a while and thought thoughtfully. It seems that there are quite a lot of things that your Majesty doesn't want me to know. But he didn't seem to be interested in it, so he didn't say more about it and just said, Although God Zhu Ti has been resurrected, her body and soul were weak before she returned to her rightful position. There is no need for me to explain it. As her envoy, you should know how many people in the world covet her, right? Now, I am just trying to do a good deed. They are all smart people. They don't need to speak too eloquently, and they can understand each other's meaning. Indeed, there are many people in the world who have evil intentions towards Zhu Ti. How can we ensure that the young man in front of us is not one of them? Now that Yinlin is guarding your Majesty, she will actually be fine, but if the water god knows her identity, how many branches will grow? Thinking of this, Zhao Shi was slightly solemn. Your Majesty is the one without dirt. God of Light, there are indeed many unscrupulous people in the world who are interested in her. Your Majesty has already anticipated this, so you gave us 4 divine envoys the inspiration to always serve by her side. It is our duty as our divine envoys to protect your Majesty. I won't bother the water god anymore. I'm afraid your Majesty has misunderstood what I meant. The young man at the jade table raised the corners of his lips, which seemed to be a smile. However, because his face was calm and the corners of his lips moved slightly, the smile seemed a little careless. About the protection. Regarding the matter of God Zhu Ti, I am not seeking His Majesty's opinion. I am making a deal with His Majesty. His words were neither quick nor slow, but his words were coercive and did not give anyone any face at all. Transaction, what I mean is that only by asking me to help with this, can the Venerable get back your magic power that was sealed by me, and the Venerable has no choice. Zhao, she does not have a temper that is easily angered, but the young man is very capable of irritating people. You yellow-haired brat, Zhao, she scolded her coldly. How dare you force me to humiliate me like this? The young man didn't take it seriously at all. I'm very polite to you, Your Majesty. He seemed to suddenly have a little extra interest in talking. Normally, when I want to force people, I like to bind them with immortal locks. Locked on a stone pillar and tortured. He tapped the mysterious fan in his hand with his index finger noncommittally. The gods in the 9 heavens punish the gods for making mistakes, and there are not only crude punishments of heavenly fire and thunder, but also some complex and exquisite punishments that no one in the punishment department is in charge of. At that time, I had been in charge for several decades and had studied every punishment. This is a threat. You. Zhao, she covered her chest and fell down in anger. If she had the magic power, she would definitely start a fight with him immediately. However, the situation was like this, so she could only hold it back. Ignorance. Yuqi was finally hard to come by. Swallowing, he sneered. Have you not heard your predecessors and gods mention to you that the master, Emperor Jiaoshi, is a tough guy who doesn't want to eat anything? If you think torture is aggravating, I will obey your words. You can try it. The young man thought about it for a moment and smiled. I just thought about it, and there is no need to try. Your Majesty, and I don't actually have to go to that step. He said calmly, limited by the laws of heaven, I cannot do it without reason. Zhu Xian, Your Majesty is not afraid of torture and will torture you until the end. I can only let you go. But if you and I get to that point, I will never help you break the seal on Your Majesty's body. You can only wait until the day when God Zhu Ti returns to the throne and let her help you unblock the seal. He looked at him, his eyes calm, but without the magic power to protect the immortal soul and immortal body. If you can wait until that day alive, you will be a question. Zhao Shi's heart sank, and he said slowly, I don't believe that you and Your Majesty are the only 2 people in this world who can unlock this seal. You're right, the young man replied calmly. In fact, all the gods in the ancient world can break the seal, but this seal was placed by me, and they will not cause this trouble. As if he saw what he was thinking, the young man added, there's no need to count on your fellow divine envoys, such as Yinlin, because he can't solve it. The heart that was hanging in the air plummeted, and Zhao Shi's whole body was shocked. At this moment, she realized that the young man in white in front of him, who had reached the highest level of arrogance, was not only arrogant and difficult to deal with, but also in terms of his character, methods, and cultivation. Because it should not be underestimated. It was he who had just underestimated the enemy. He was indeed dissatisfied with Lian San because of Zhu Ti, but deep down in his heart he was actually arrogant, and he never took this young water god who was born after the new god era into his eyes. Sometimes he couldn't help but hate him, but he just hated his destiny. He never thought that this young god could surpass him in divine power. Although he is the water god that heaven and earth look forward to, his talent may be extremely high, but no matter how high his talent is, no matter how old he is, how much cultivation can he have? However, for such a young child, who looked like a young child to him, the seal planted in his body could only be broken by the god of the ancient world. He created a weakness for him all his life, and he actually had to be restrained by it. He suppressed the impatience and anger in his chest, raised his head, and looked at the young man in front of him, and for the first time he felt fearful. For a long time, Zhao Shi, who was sitting on the couch, closed his eyes as if resigned to his fate. All kinds of thoughts drifted through his mind, and he finally chose to give in. This time, my skills are inferior to others, and I admit it. He had just woken up not long ago, his energy was already low. At this point in his confrontation with Lian Song, when he chose to admit defeat, the tight string in his heart suddenly broke, and his face looked slumped and exhausted. He paused for a while. Since you said this is a deal, there should be room for negotiation, right? The young man nodded. Of course. He sat quietly for a long time. I have 2 conditions. If you agree to these 2 conditions, I will do what you want. The young man was satisfied with his surrender and probably expected that he would have other demands. He raised his hand to signal him to speak. He said slowly, "First, you must make the bone-eating mantra, and you will never harm your majesty forever." The bone-eating mantra is a kind of oath in the great prehistoric era. If the person who makes the oath violates the oath, he will be subject to heavenly fire. The pain of burning bones is to be burned once a day, and the punishment will not stop until the immortal bones are burned by the heavenly fire. This is a poisonous oath that makes people feel horrified. The young man did not immediately express his attitude towards the conditions for making an evil oath. He only said, "What about the second clause?" "The second item," Zhao Shi paused, "is a personal matter of mine." He hesitated for a moment, hesitating because he was not used to expressing his feelings, but the hesitation was only for a moment. He said frankly, "In this life, there is still an unfinished fate in this world that needs you to fulfill." Since he started to speak, it was not so difficult to say it. He continued fluently, "You are dedicated to protecting my aunt, the Lord in this world. I shouldn't care too much about earthly fate. But as a human race, I am born to have more 7 emotions than the gods, and I absolutely cannot give up the fate I have forged here." He looked at the young man and told him bluntly, "My heart is in Hongyu County. Lord, this was the case when I was Ji Mingfeng. Even though I have returned to being the master now, I still love her. I want to marry her, but Ayu is obviously very close and dependent on you, so I need you to swear that you will never appear again in Ayu's lifetime." In front of her. The cave was extremely quiet, and the young man didn't speak for a long time. This situation was very different from what they had just said. No matter what he said just now, the young man would always react immediately and put him at a disadvantage with ease. A beautiful young man, he is arrogant and indifferent as if he doesn't care about anything. He is also very dignified. He doesn't talk much, but his words touch people's heart. He really hated him. Seeing that his face was blank and seemed to be frozen, she felt a little happy. From waking up to now, he had been embarrassed all the way in front of this young man. At this time, he finally found a little sense of calm and superiority. He stared at the young man for a moment. "As far as I know, you have been avoiding Ayu. I just hope that you can continue as usual in the future. This should not be difficult for you." The cave was originally illuminated by giant candles. The wind blew through the forest and rustled the leaves. The wind faintly swayed into the cave and wrapped around the candle flames, creating a strong energy that would last until death. The candlelight couldn't bear to linger and suddenly went out, leaving the cave extremely dark for a while. The young man said, "Even if I never appear in front of her again, she will not like you." He no longer deliberately called himself I to make people angry, but there was no special attitude or emotion in his voice. This sentence naturally made Zhao Shi unhappy, but for some reason, although the young man's voice was soft, he could feel that he might not be better off, so he suppressed his desire to retort and only said softly, "She likes it. It doesn't matter if she doesn't like me. She is soft-hearted and I treat her with sincerity. I don't know that one day she will be enlightened. Doesn't the water god never like to talk in circles? Why bother with these irrelevant things at this time? I just want to know if you will agree to my request." The Imperial Master, who had been standing in the corner with no presence, lit a white candle near the ice couch, and finally there was light in the cave. When the Imperial Master was weighing the fire folds and preparing to light the next one, he didn't know what he saw. He stopped his hand in shock and stood back in the corner. There was only one candle lighting the cave at this time, and the jade table far away from the bed and the young man next to the jade table were enveloped in shadow. Unable to see the expression of the young man in the shadow, I could only hear him suddenly speak. "During the past hundreds of thousands of years, didn't the Venerable have longed for the god Zuti? Why must he become a jade in this life?" Zhao Shi was suffocated. His heart for Zuti has never changed. Not only has it not changed, hundreds of thousands of years of obsession have made longing for her an instinct. Even if he forgets everything and is reincarnated, he will still be attracted to her. Feelings. But of course he couldn't confess all this to the young man, so he just pursed his lips sarcastically. Didn't you see it from my memory? It's impossible for her to accept me. Of course, he said lightly, there are many things that you haven't seen, so you don't know that I have long understood that there is a huge gap between me and her. I was born in the human race and am immortal. In fact, I should have been matched with a mortal. Match a mortal. The young man repeated these 6 words, and there was emotion in his voice as cold as ice. But do you know that although you were born in the human race, you are not an ordinary mortal? You have a long lifespan, and you have nothing to do with the gods. Strange. The voice came from the shadow, and it seemed to be covered with a layer of shadow, and you actually said that you want to be sincere and make her happy. If she really falls in love with you, then you want to how to do it. Zhao, she had never thought that he was a confused person, but at this moment he didn't quite understand what the young man meant. He frowned and said, then, of course, I will marry her and stay with her. Hearing his answer, the young man seemed to think he was extremely childish and ridiculous. Your Majesty, your vision has become short-sighted because you have been reincarnated for a long time, right? Let me tell you what will happen next. Then, his voice was cold. In less than 20 years, she will find that she is getting older, but you are still young. So one day, she will understand that you are a god, your lifespan is endless, and she will not be able to stay with you forever. What do you think she will do then? Zhao did not answer immediately. All the assumptions made by the young man were based on the fact that Chengyu was immortal. But she is not an ordinary person. If he can really make her fall in love with him, why worry about the two of them not being able to stay together? All he needs to worry about is that she will still choose destiny after she returns to her rightful position, but even so what? He was a little distracted. She will be in pain, the young man said, not caring about his distraction or whether he answered. She will not accept that she can only be with you for one life, so when she enters the underworld 100 years later, she will refuse to drink Wangchuan water, will choose to struggle in reincarnation with its memories. Then, in repeated reincarnations, for her, she will always spend 1/3 of her time growing up and 1/3 of her time aging. In each period of her life, she spends 2/3 of her time immersed in the pain of not being a good match for you and is tortured for it. The cold voice added a layer of gloom. How many lives do you think she can last for you? How many more lives can you watch her suffer? This was originally a question that did not need to be considered, because it was impossible for all this to happen. But if Qingyu is really just immortal? Zhao Shi frowned. Why let her reincarnate? Why not help her become an immortal? Good question. The young man laughed. Isn't your venerable very familiar with the order of heaven and earth after the new god era? Don't you know that when human beings cultivate immortality, after going through many hardships to build an immortal body, they need to cut off the 7 emotions and extinguish the 6 desires before they can obtain the immortal book? He looked extremely disgusted and impatient. Are you still dreaming of being able to have a happy marriage with her in the 9 heavens? Zhao Shi did not speak. His eyes focused on where the young man was sitting, and then he stood up, holding the candlestick that was half a man tall, and moved the only candlelight to the center of the cave. The bright light finally reached where the young man was, dispelling the shadow that shrouded him in an instant, and Zhao Shi finally saw the young man's face. In fact, there is no difference from before. It can still be regarded as the 4 words, Gujing has no waves, but now there is xiao snow on the ancient well, and there is ice between the young man's eyebrows. Zhao Shi stared at him for a moment. I'm actually a little curious. Are you saying these words to me or to yourself? Are you asking these questions to me or yourself? Then he saw the young man's right hand holding the fan suddenly grasped, causing the fan handle to press downwards. It's really good to have light, Zhao Shi thought. This cunning young man's heart seems to be no longer so unpredictable. He said clearly, you like her. But when he came to this conclusion, he didn't even believe it, so he repeated it incredulously. You actually like her too. Zhao Shi had always seen how Lian Song treated Qingyu when she was Ji Mingfeng. Indeed, For a while, Lian Song doted on Qingyu and almost answered her every request. It was probably because of this that Chengyu was so clingy to him. At that time, after returning from Mingxi, she felt that she could never win back Chengyu's heart no matter what. But what he didn't expect was that Lian Song would start to alienate Chengyu. He understands things in this world better than Chengyu. We know that there are those romantic and dandy men in the world. Women are just playthings for them. They're easily attracted by beautiful faces, but they actually have no long-term character. He deeply believed that Lian Song was the same. Chengyu was born like that, so it makes sense that even Lian Song would be attracted by her appearance. But Bo Xing's dandies have always been like this. No matter how beautiful their appearance is, it can only make them fresh and stop for a moment. Lian Song's romantic reputation has long been spread in Ping'an City. He was new enough and tired of her, so he alienated her. This actually makes sense. During the days when Chengyu was struggling and suffering from this, she hated Lian Song for deceiving and playing with her, but on the other hand, she was secretly grateful for it. But all these unimaginable things about the young man turned out to be nothing more than his prejudiced speculations. The water god whom he regarded as a playboy actually really liked Qingyu, and those behaviors of alienating and avoiding her were not just a ploy to get tired of her. Because there is a difference between immortals and mortals, this is the true heart of the water god. She could not accept this truth. If Lian Song really loves Qingyu, he should not deceive him about Chengyu's identity, and for Chengyu's good, he should try his best to promote their fate. But how could he be willing to do so? He rubbed his forehead and tried to convince Lian Song and himself. No, you don't really like her. Really liking someone is not. But the young man interrupted him. We have talked too many digressions. As if he was a little tired, these words will not make sense no matter how much they are said. The cold and thin lips were stretched into a straight line. Under the candlelight, the color of her lips was very light, so she looked particularly ruthless. I will agree to all your requests. I can never appear in front of her, but you'd better not provoke her again. He raised his eyes. Now can you tell me the whereabouts of Godzudi? Zhaoxi pressed her temples heavily. Aren't you sure that Ayu wouldn't like me even without you? Why bother saying anything at this time to tell me not to provoke her again? The young man said coldly, barely holding back. It's up to you. She put down her fingers and looked at the young man intently. He did not really like Qingyu, he thought. Otherwise, how could he agree to never see her again and compromise with himself so easily? In this case, even if you choose to lie to him, it will not be considered as hindering a good relationship because of your own selfishness. He paused for a while. That day, after your Majesty's sacrifice to chaos, she left a breath of spirit, which turned into a red lotus seed. She once said that if you use the spiritual spring in Kunlun to water the lotus seed, as long as you water it properly, the lotus seed will soon grow up and become a god again. So I sent the lotus seed to Kunlungsu and handed it over to God Mo Yuan. God Mo Yuan planted it in the southern wilderness. When I entered reincarnation, I never heard whether the lotus seed had grown. What happened to it now, but I don't know. Every word is true. Even if Song deliberately found fault, he couldn't find anything wrong. This can indeed be regarded as a kind of Zhu Tiai's whereabouts. But if the young man is dissatisfied and presses him for the whereabouts of Zhu Ti, how should he answer? Zhaoxi quickly calculated in her mind that she could not tell him the truth no matter what. That's it. When he was still hesitant, the young man spoke. It was hard to tell whether he believed it or not, but he seemed to know that this was the best answer he could get from him. He did not try to ask any more questions, but pressed the tip of his fan and concluded the long conversation. There is a spiritual spring in this forest. 3 hours of soaking in the spiritual spring can wash away the turbid breath. Your Majesty, please go away. I will come in 3 hours to interpret the seal for your Majesty. Until he was sent to the entrance of the cave by the imperial master, she still felt a little unreal. He had already prepared for several more confrontations with this young man who was cunning, deceitful, and extremely wealthy. He didn't want it to happen like this. It's over. He paused at the entrance of the cave, and the imperial master lowered his eyes to look at the map in his hand. That was the Lingquan map that the Imperial Master had just presented to him. The Imperial Master coughed slightly and followed Liansong in calling him venerable. "Your venerable master, you can't quite understand this map?" he said with shame. "The poor Taoist's drawing is a little simpler," and he said enthusiastically, "Either the poor Taoist can understand the map. Let's lead the venerable there in person." Jiaoshi raised her hand to stop the Imperial Master, turned around and faced the cave, and saw that the young man was still sitting in the same posture as before, with his eyes lowered, and he didn't know what he was thinking about. Under the dim light, his expression was like the thin ice on the lake in winter, cold and hard, yet fragile in nature. Jiaoshi was in a daze for a moment, and he suddenly remembered Lian San he had seen in reincarnation. That night was the Lantern Festival in the mortal world. There was a lively lantern market in the distance, but where he was a lonely pond. "He is a carp?" Lian San appeared by the Lotus pond in the middle of the night, and with him was a lovely girl in green. The girl complained softly. Qinghe clearly said that during the Lantern Festival in the mortal world, the most beautiful ice lanterns will be displayed during the Lantern Festival. But we have been to 5 mortal worlds and have not seen such lanterns. "Your Highness, is it? Is Qinghe talking nonsense, or are we going the wrong way?" The young man answered the question incorrectly. "Indeed, we have walked 5 places. Aren't you tired?" The girl pouted. "I'm a little tired, but I just want to see that kind of light." The young man glanced at the lonely pond beside him and suddenly raised his mysterious fan. The water in the pond shook, and a phoenix suddenly burst out of the water. The phoenix was actually made of pool water, with colorful pearls embedded inside. The water phoenixes soar around the pond, which is extremely beautiful. The girl let out a surprised cry and turned into a blue bird. One bird and one phoenix chased each other, playing endlessly in the midnight sky. However, before the girl could enjoy herself as much as she could, the water phoenix suddenly turned into a torrential rain and fell into the earth. The blue bird cried out pitifully, transformed into a girl and landed next to the boy, hugging the boy's arm and acting coquettishly. "Your Highness is worthy of being the god of water. The water phoenix you made is really interesting, but you can't help but play too much. Your Highness can't help it anymore. Make one for me, I haven't had enough fun yet." She boldly pressed her lips on the back of the young man's hand holding the fan, then turned her head to look at him with a blush and begged softly and charmingly, "Okay, Your Highness?" The young man lowered his eyes slightly. "No matter how interesting it is just a toy that will disappear in an instant. If you turn it into another one, it can only exist for an instant. Why bother with it?" The girl stood close to him, pressing her face against his arm lovingly, and whispered softly, "You know that moments have lengths. There are long moments, and there are short moments." Suddenly she felt sentimental and rubbed her face against him. Rubbing the back of his hand, he said softly, "Just like when Your Highness and I are together, we know that it will never last forever. This fate may only be a moment for Your Highness, but I must seize this moment and find ways to make it longer. Because at this moment, an extra foot long will give me an extra foot of joy, and an extra inch long will give me an extra inch of joy." She lowered her head and kissed the back of his hand again. "Even if the relationship between you and me only lasts a moment, but it can't stop my dedication to His Highness. Does Your Highness like me like this?" Such an affectionate confession, coming from such a beautiful woman, should have been particularly touching, but the young man frowned. After a moment, he took his hand out of the girl's arms and said calmly, "I will return to your Chaoyang tomorrow. Guba, you shouldn't stay around me anymore." The girl was stunned. "Your Highness, did I say something wrong?" Her face, which was as red as a rosebud just now, suddenly turned pale. It's only been 3 months. She murmured, she said, tears suddenly falling down. "They said that His Highness is heartless. I don't believe it." "Your Highness is obviously so gentle, but why suddenly today?" She tried to grab the young man's hand and burst into tears. "Your Highness, tell me, if it were me, if I said something wrong or did something wrong, I will correct it. The young man did not hide away and allowed the crying girl to grab the sleeve of the plain gauze robe. You don't need to change, you are not wrong. His expression was very calm, and he was even gentle when he looked at her. It's just a moment. Words are many different to you, but they're no different to me. They only exist for a very short time, cannot be permanent, and are meaningless. He handed her a silk handkerchief to wipe her tears, which was a proper and graceful gesture, but his words were cold and cold without knowing it. You have fallen too deep into this dreamy bubble, fog, rain, thunder and lightning, but you don't know it. It is for your own good that I free you as soon as possible. Zhao, she clenched her right hand and pulled away from her memories. He was a little confused as to why so many years had passed. When he recalled it, all the words and demeanor of the young man at that time were still fresh in his mind. He stared into the cave, using the light of the white candle to carefully distinguish Liansong's face. The once dignified and slightly green eyebrows were now fully grown, poetic and picturesque, handsome and dazzling. Although the young water god has an indifferent temperament, he is born with a romantic and unlucky appearance. He should not put the word love in his eyes. After a moment of pleasure, all the lingering and tender feelings have passed without a trace and disappeared from the thousands of flowers. Walking through, Pian Pian didn't touch a leaf. This is what he should be. How could he be sincere towards Changyu? Zhao Shi frowned. Seeing Zhao Shi standing quietly at the entrance of the cave, neither advancing nor retreating, the imperial master reminded him in a low voice, "Your Majesty, this is." Zhao Shi came back to her senses, turned around and left with the map in hand, walked a few steps, then stepped back, stood at the entrance of the cave and said inwards, "I have seen you once in reincarnation." The young man in the cave raised his head, showing a slightly surprised expression. Zhao Shi said, "In order to make a bluebird happy, you accompanied her to 5 different mortal worlds on the night of the Lantern Festival, just to find the kind of ice lantern that the girl wanted to see." He frowned slightly. He frowned and pursed his lips. "You don't want to talk about Ayu with me. You think she is a digression, but you act like you like her very much. But I still want to tell you that you are not as beautiful as you think. I like her so much." It was like asking him, but also asking myself. You treated her well and even took her to Hades to untie her knot, just like when you brought her to the mortal world just to make that bluebird happy. What's the difference? The young man seemed to be stunned by his question. His expression went blank for a moment, but soon turned dark, as if a storm was coming over the river and sea. "My personal affairs are not yours to worry about." This time, Zhao Shi didn't take the young man's words of rejection to heart, and their positions seemed to be suddenly reversed. Zhao Shi said lightly, "Including the fact that you promised me that you would never appear in front of Ayu again for the sake of your Majesty. I know what you mean. You think this is for Ayu's good, so that she has no chance to fall in love with a god. Nip it in the bud." He couldn't help snorting. It's such a calm, rational, and selfless idea, but it only means that you really don't like her that much. Because if you really like someone, it's difficult to be so calm and rational, and you will never do it. It would be too difficult to be willing to never see her again for the rest of my life. Zhao Shi paused and looked at the young man coldly, persistently, but inquiringly. "But I am a little curious. If she has fallen in love with you, if this is not something that can be nipped in the bud, what will we do? In the name of being different from immortals, should we persuade her to take back her sincerity?" He curled his lips mockingly. "After all, you are calm, rational, and very selfless." The young man pursed his lips tightly and said after a while, "Do you think you are enough?" Zhao Shi shifted her gaze and looked at the shadows in the cave where the light did not reach. "You should understand whether I am self-righteous or not." He was silent for a moment and suddenly said in a persuasive voice, "Do you still remember what you said to that bluebird at that time? Did you say something? You said that all the moments in the world are meaningless to you." He turned his gaze to the young man again, as if he wanted to convince him, "Actually, Ayu's life is just a moment to you. So it's meaningless for you to be with her, are you right?" Liansong smiled, and the smile with hidden anger on his handsome face made the normally calm face look a little distorted, but it also contained a lot of vividness, and it had a violent and wanton beauty. At this moment, he was completely different from the one who could force Zhao Shi to make a deal with ease, and the one who tiredly told Zhao Shi, "I have talked too many digressions with His Holiness." He tapped his fingers, his face cold and violent. "Remind me of the blue bird again and again. Your Majesty wants to tell me that because I have had many women in the past, I am not worthy of liking Qinyu at all, and I cannot bear to do anything to you. Her beloved, isn't she?" Zhao Shi was slightly startled. This was not his intention. He couldn't understand why Lian San would want to go here. However, he asked himself and found that he indeed thought so. He wished there was more evidence to prove his opinion. Lian San had no true intentions. 3 in a row is not a good match. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes, you are not qualified to like her. So get out of this dream, fog, rain, thunder, and lightning as soon as possible." He looked at him seriously for a while. "This is what you want to do, isn't it?" Even standing outside the cave, the Imperial Master felt the sudden chill in the cave. He thought it was an illusion. He looked up and saw that the wax torch was clearly extinguished, but he saw ice sticking to the ground, like an elegant but cold, germs that infect everything that can be touched. Even the struggling candle flame froze into a column of ice flames in an instant. Under the cold light of the ice flames, Lian San's face was gloomy, with an anger he had never seen hidden in his expression. The Imperial Master trembled and hurriedly grabbed Zhao Shi and took 4 or 5 steps back. "Your Highness, please calm down. This. He had an idea and pushed Zhao Shi back while talking nonsense into the cave. "It looks like it's going to rain now, and the moon is about to disappear. I'll take the Lord to the spiritual spring first, otherwise he won't be able to find the way later. Your Highness has already spent a lot of mana and energy tonight, so why not take a short nap at this time?" The ice had spread to the entrance of the cave and covered a nearby sycamore tree. The solid ice engulfed the tree trunk, and the tree crown trembled in the night wind in fear. Zhao Shi frowned deeply and wanted to speak. "You was beaten by the Imperial Master." He covered his mouth with his backhand. Relying on the fact that the Master had just woken up and his magic power and physical strength had not been restored, the National Master almost dragged Zhao Shi by the waist and ran wildly deep into the dense forest. After running for a while, I looked back. Under the moonlight, only the 2 sycamore trees at the entrance of the cave were frozen. The ice did not continue to wreak havoc. The Imperial Master breathed a sigh of relief. Although the Imperial Preceptor was not very polite to Prince Ji in the past, since Prince Ji resurrected and became the Master, when he thought that the man in front of him was hundreds of thousands of years old and the king of the human race, the Imperial Preceptor could not help but respect him. However, in this situation, the Imperial Master couldn't help but complain a little. "I have been watching the matter between the Third Highness and the Princess for a long time." He sighed. "The Princess is pitiful, but the Third Highness also has his own difficulties. I respect you. Why should you blame His Highness so much and insist on irritating His Highness to such an extent?" He said earnestly. "Your Majesty has not yet recovered his magic power at this time, and compared with the Third Highness, I have low magic power. If I really provoke him, Your Highness lost control. What will happen in the end?" Finally, he concluded, "No matter how dissatisfied Your Highness is with His Highness, please bear with it." Hearing this, Zhao Shi turned to look at the Imperial Master. "Did I say or do something wrong?" He stroked his eyebrows. "I just wanted him to recognize what kind of person he is." The Imperial Master temporarily put aside the self-cultivation of a good Taoist priest and couldn't help but participate in this emotional topic, sighing, "But the poor Taoist thinks that His Highness really likes the princess." Zhao Shi said lightly, "I didn't say he didn't like it." He smiled, with a coolness in his smile, "But if you really know him well, you should know that his love is worthless." As for sincerity, he said he asked sarcastically, "Based on your true knowledge and insight, how sincere do you think Your Highness can be to Au?" The Imperial Master was silent for a moment. He actually doesn't understand this either. He thought of the hug between Chengyu and Liansong in the Ming Division, and the gaffe that Lian Song made for Qingyu today, but he also thought of the night Qingyu came to his house to say goodbye to Lian Song. That seemed like a breakup after learning Lian Song's identity. That night, Qingyu asked Lian Song whether he had sacrificed half of his body to cultivate for a female immortal named Chang'e, and whether he came to this mortal world for Chang'e. Lian Song answered yes. The Imperial Master still remembers Chengyu's heartbroken but patient expression at that time. The national teacher doesn't understand love. He doesn't know whether a person who really loves another person can watch her being sad. Therefore, for a long time, the Imperial Master did not speak. Seeing that the Imperial Master was silent for a long time, Zhao Shi answered the question he had just asked. He looked into the depths of the dense forest and said calmly, "He is probably 3/3 sincere to Au, not more." After bringing Zhao Shi to Lingquan, the Imperial Master was restless for a moment and finally decided to go back to the cave to see how Lian San was doing. As soon as we arrived at the entrance of the cave, under the hazy moonlight, we saw that the ice on the trunks of the 2 sycamore trees had melted away, and the 2 trees were trembling together, as if they were still frightened by the sudden disaster half an hour ago. To be able to tremble so vividly means that it is still full of vitality, which makes the Imperial Master feel a little at ease. He leaned into the cave and saw pitch black. He felt a little unsure. He coughed, but when he heard no response, he hesitated for a moment and lit up the fire. The firelight spread, and the Imperial Master was stunned for a moment. Lian Song was still sitting in his original position, with his right hand supporting his forehead on the armrest of the jade chair, his eyes slightly closed, looking silent and calm, and indeed he seemed to be taking a nap. However, everything around him seemed to have just experienced a thunder and lightning. The candlesticks fell over, the jade table shattered, pots and cups scattered, and the ice bed turned into powder. It seemed like rain was falling on the roof of the cave. The sound of raindrops hit the Imperial Master's face, giving him a coldness that turned into ice. The Imperial Master held the firelight and looked at the roof of the cave. It was indeed ice that was melting. The Imperial Master couldn't help but take a few steps closer and looked at Lian San again, only to find that his clothes were all wet. No longer feeling the overwhelming anger of the water god, the Imperial Master no longer felt nervous or flustered. Surprise and doubts followed one after another. He tentatively called out, "Your Highness," and asked, "You, what's going on here?" After all, the Imperial Master had served the late Emperor for so many years and was very good at observing what was happening. He decided that if Lian Song didn't respond, he would create a barrier for him to avoid the rain and then withdraw silently. This was considered thoughtful. He counted 15 times and was about to make a seal when he heard Lian San suddenly say, "I'm thinking that maybe what he said is true." The Imperial Master's gesture of pinching the seal stopped. This he naturally refers to Zhao Shi, but Zhao Shi said too much today. Which part of what Zhao Shi said makes sense to His Highness? The Imperial Master hesitated and asked, "Your Highness is referring to?" Lian San didn't open his eyes and still held his forehead, so it looked like he was talking in his sleep, but his voice was very sober. Back then, there was a fairy named Chang'e above the 9 heavens, who fell in love with my second brother. But Chang'e Nai is a member of the demon clan and became an immortal with a demon body, so it is impossible for her to be with my second brother. But even if she knows that there is no future between the two of them, she must stay by my second brother's side. Sometimes I think, what's the point of this? Although the Imperial Master does not understand the relationship between men and women, he also understands human nature. After thinking for a moment, he replied, "I guess it means that I can see His Highness the Second Highness from time to time. This must be a meaningful thing to Fairy Chang'e." Then I heard Lian San laugh suddenly. "Yes," he said. After a while, he continued, "I miss her very much, but I can't help but not see her. So maybe I really don't like her that much." The Imperial Master thought for a long time before finally understanding what His Highness the Third Highness meant. She refers to Qingyu. He was talking about Qingyu. The Imperial Master didn't know what to say for a moment. Seeing that the fire was about to burn out, he picked up the candlestick that had fallen on the ground and lit the candle flame again. This unlucky white candle was robbed again and again tonight. Even if it burned with fire and was able to breathe, it was still dying, as if it was about to be extinguished again. That fragile appearance is a bit like the marriage between Liansong and Chengyu. The imperial master suddenly remembered the figure of Yi Qingyu leaving his house. There was a desolate and cold moon in the sky, and she was holding the lantern he lent her to her. Although she was wearing a thick fox fur cloak, her back still looked slender and a bit shaky. The only thing that left with her was the same slender and bleak shadow that accompanied her. The lights and shadows in the snow are all lonely, leaving a string of tiny footprints on the snow. The imperial master always remembered his mood at that time. He felt that Chengyu was a little pitiful like that. Today, I heard His Highness the Third Prince say that he might not really like her that much. The feeling he had towards Chengyu that day once again filled his heart. The kind-hearted imperial master once again felt that the beautiful but thin and slender girl was a bit pitiful. End of Lotus Step Chapter 24, Book 2. By Tangqi English translated using Google.